What's up guys, Midnight Hatter here. If you don't know who I am the creator of a homebrew Mobile Suit Gundam tabletop role-playing game based on Dungeons & Dragons 5e rules, and today we're going to talk about character sheets. So one of the reasons that I started making videos documenting my process of converting D&D 5e over into the Gundam universe was to kind of inspire people to create their own tabletop role-playing games based on franchises that they like or original properties using the same sort of thought processes that I did. Now, one of the things that I wanted to develop early on was a dynamic character sheet along the same lines as OrcPub or D&D Beyond that would allow players to create their characters, store them on a server somewhere, and access them while they were online. And it would take care of all the math and all of the calculations and things like that for them so that they wouldn't be constantly, having to turn to scrap paper in order to calculate stats and to hit bonuses and things like that. Now, surprisingly, I wasn't able to find a tutorial on how to create a dynamic character sheet, so I wanted to document the process of me cobbling together all of the coding knowledge that I have to do that for my Gundam RPG so that you could adapt it for your own role-playing games and not be beholden to third-party services like Astral or Roll20. Now, first you're going to want to get into a development environment that allows for both HTML and JavaScript. You can do this in Visual Studio Code or in Adobe Dreamweaver if you wanted to, but I find it's easiest to just create an account on CodePen, and it's got a browser-based development environment built in for you so that you can save all of your work and, keep up with the tutorials as I release them. So first I'm going to paste in a reference to the CSS framework Bootstrap. This is just going to make formatting the whole thing a whole lot easier for me. You don't have to do this step at all. I could probably make 10 videos based on just formatting, but I want to focus on just the JavaScript and creating these dynamic values as opposed to worrying about how to format the whole thing. If you are interested in learning how to format this character sheet using Bootstrap, let me know in the comments below and I'll make a separate video on just that. Now let's start by just creating a container for our character sheet here. And then let's create some basic divisions here. Now you'll see that I'm giving these divs different classes. Those are in reference to Bootstrap, and it's just, for formatting purposes. All right, so let's get organized. So in this first quick tutorial, I'm just going to be covering converting your ability scores into ability modifiers and setting up your proficiency bonus based on your player level. So we'll create a table here for the ability scores. That'll probably be the easiest way to keep them organized. Create a row here to store the header values. And inside that top row, we will have our ability. Help if I spell it right. Our score. And our modifier. In the next row, so I'm going to use the abilities from D&D 5e, but you can fill these in with whatever values you want and fix the math as needed if you need to, but this is just going to be for easy reference. After we create another row, help if I spell right, All right, here's where the fun begins. In this next column, we're going to create our first input. And it is going to be a type of number. And then we will put in a placeholder of 10. And it is very important that you give it an ID. So we are going to give it an ID of str score. Now you'll see that I used camel case. That's just best practices, but you don't have to do it. Just make sure that it's something that you'll remember. And then in the last column, we're going to create another input of type number. Set our placeholder equal to 0. And set the ID equal to str mod for modifier. Now you might be wondering why we're using inputs. This is so that we can, of course, change them if we want to. And then by making them numbers, you actually have the ability to go in there and actually kind of bump them up and down. Then we're going to use the IDs to reference them in our JavaScript. So let's go ahead and rather than watching me make a ton of typos, we're just going to do the same thing with our other ability scores. All right, now that we have all of that in, you might want to come up here and click the Save button, just to make sure that you don't lose all of your progress. Okay, I went in here and added this little bit of CSS here that's going to change all of the inputs that are inside of a table so that they're not as wide as they were before, and that's just going to allow us to use our columns to the best of their abilities. All right, now moving on, we are going to do a little header for our next column. And we are going to put in player level. Let's go ahead and copy that little bit. And in the final column, we are going to put our proficiency bonus. Go ahead and create a line break there. And then we're going to create another input. It's going to be another number. And the ID is going to be prof bonus. And we'll do the same thing over here. Put in a line break, input, type, number, and ID is just player, put it in quotes. The ID is going to be player level. Close it up, and everything should look normal. Now, one of the things you might want to do with your player level is set the min equal to 1 and max equal to 20. And this will keep people from going up to level 30. Now, let's go ahead and create our first function. If you're in CodePen, you can just go over here to the JavaScript panel, but if not, you're going to have to use script tags within your HTML that look like this. But like I said, we're in CodePen, so we don't need that. So first we're going to say what we're doing. It's a function, and we're going to call this one update modifiers. The parentheses indicate that there's no value that gets passed through the function unless we want it to. The brackets are everything that's going to happen in the function, and if you're anal like me, you can put in a comment that says what your function is going to do. So we're going to convert ability scores into modifiers. So for each ability score, we're going to create a variable. In this case, we're going to say var for variable and name it strength score. And we're going to set that equal to document, which is the scope of our function here, get element by ID, and in our parentheses and quotes, we are going to look up that strength score. It would help if I spell it right. And because it is a input, we are going to put in the value. Now, once we've got that variable, we can go in and say document.getElementById by ID in parentheses and quotes str mod for strength modifier, and we're going to set the value of that equal to, so we're going to be using a built-in JavaScript function called math.floor, and what that does is it's going to round down to the nearest whole integer. And we're going to use our newly created variable strength score. We are going to subtract 10 from that number and then divide that number by 2. And we close up, whenever we do something in JavaScript, you have to close it with that semicolon so that it'll do it. Now, what we're going to want to do, so we're going to hop back into our HTML and we're going to set on change of our strength score. We're going to call that function update modifiers. All right, now let's go ahead and see how that works. When we hop in here and we change our strength score, say to 12, you see our modifier changes dynamically. And this is how it works in D&D. For every 2 score points you have above 10, your modifier goes up by +1, and vice versa. If you go below 10, you get that. Now, one of the things you might want to do is set the initial value equal to 10. And that way, when you go in and you just click the arrows up and down, you're not starting from 0 the same way as you would from here. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to copy that same bit of code, but change out the prefixes on our variables, and everything is going to work just perfectly. We're going to go ahead and add that same onChange update modifiers function call for all of our scores. And for the heck of it, let's go ahead and change those placeholders into values. Remember to save your work. And now, all of your values should update dynamically. And this is going to be valuable because we're going to call that modifier later on when we get into things like skill trees and things like that. Okay, so now what about our proficiency bonus? Let's go ahead and close up that update modifiers function so that we have more room to play with up here. And we're going to create another function. And we're going to call that update prof bonus. And as usual, we will say what we're going to do in this function. Update proficiency bonus based on player level. So the first thing we're going to do is create a variable, var player level equal to document get element by ID. And again, this just searches the page for that ID of player level. And we're going to say value. Now here's the problem with this basic getter is that it doesn't tell JavaScript that we're working with a number. We know that it's a number in the HTML part, but we don't know that in JavaScript. So what you can do is there's a function in JavaScript also called parse integer, parse int there. And if you just wrap that entire value in parentheses, it is going to search for that value and make sure that it's a number. It's going to convert it to an integer based on what's inside there. And that's just going to make sure that our math works out the way it's supposed to. All right. So now, because the proficiency bonus is not based on a mathematical equation of what the player level is, we're actually going to have to create an if statement. And so now what an if statement does is it's going to check whether the conditions inside the parentheses are true or not. And if they are, it is going to execute a line of code based on that. So what we're going to say is if the player level is greater than or equal to 17, we're going to execute this bit of code, which is document get element by ID, we're going to look for that prof bonus, the value of the prof bonus, and we're going to set it equal to 6, which is the highest proficiency bonus that you can get in D&D 5e. Now, that covers our highest level, but what about our lower levels? Well, we're going to have an else if statement, and if the player level is greater than or equal to 13, we're going to execute this bit of code, which is to say, copy the same bit here and set it equal to 5 instead of 6. Now the reason that we're going to do this counting down instead of counting up is that the way that this code executes is it's going to check for the first condition first. So if it's 17 or up, we'll do this. If it's not true, then it's going to check the next one down. And the reason that we're doing it like this is so that we don't accidentally set the proficiency bonus to something that it's not supposed to be. So let's go ahead and copy that same little chunk of code and do it for all of the levels that are going to go into this little formula. Now, for the last one, instead of doing else if, we're just going to do a regular else because your basic proficiency bonus is going to be 2 when you are at level 1 or level 2. All right, save your work, and we're going to have to call this function somehow, right? So in the player level, we're going to say on change update prof bonus. Now, if you've been following this tutorial to a T and you were eagle-eyed, you probably saw that I capitalized the G in get element by ID, and of course the function didn't work. But now it does because we lowercased it in all of those scripts. So sorry for the error, but now it's working. Now, before we finish up, we're going to do some optimization here. There are a lot of things on the character sheet that are going to change when the player's level changes. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a function that indicates when the player's level changes. And we will just call it player level change. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the function that gets called when you change the player level, and then over within the player level change function, we're just going to call the proficiency bonus function. So we're calling a function from another function. Now what this is going to do is, as this gets more complex, we're going to, whenever we change the player level, we'll just be able to call other functions that are going to change other things on the character sheet. So we'll just save that up, and you'll see that that function still works. Pretty cool, right? While we're at it, we might as well go ahead and update the modifiers whenever the player's level changes as well. Not that I anticipate that that will be an issue, because usually your modifiers don't change on player level change, but you know, it can't hurt to have those things be dynamic. All right, save your changes. So that's it in this first video. We've actually covered a lot more than you might realize. You know, we talked about how to use basic functions, we talked about how to set up variables, we talked about how to apply those variables in mathematical equations in order to get values out of them. Now, it's going to be important that all of these values are wrapped up in inputs, so that when everything is said and done, we can wrap the entire thing in a form, and then we can form export to PDF, and that way you can actually have print copies of your character sheet based on the values that you generate using this dynamic character sheet. So that's about all for now. Next time we're going to cover your skill points and how to dump your ability modifiers and your proficiency bonus into those skills. If you're digging this series so far, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you later.